All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rych. I have a very special guest on tonight. I actually had him on my radio show before on Reality's Rhythms, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. Very interesting fellow. He is the Lake County State's Attorney for Lake County, Illinois, Eric Rinehart. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good evening. Nice to be here. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. I just sort of texted him, like, say, hey, what do you think about this? And he's like, well, I'll come on your show and tell you. So we're very happy to have him on because this is a pressing issue, has been for a long time, actually. And it just sort of kind of keeps, it's very cyclical. I mean, something really nasty happens like George Floyd, and then the world freaks out, and rightly so, and things change, we think, and then it happens again. And we're like, well, did it actually change? So he's here to give us the inside scoop into Illinois General Assembly's efforts for concerning police reform, the amount of force and type of force they can use on the public, depending on what's going on and that kind of thing. So it's all like within the Safety Act, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Dave. So yeah, thanks for having me on the show. This is a critical topic. There's lots of different ways to talk about this topic, whether we're talking about culture, whether we're talking about policy, or whether we're talking about the law. So I'm happy to delve into any of those topics. I've been practicing criminal law in Lake County for almost exactly 20 years, specifically in Lake County. So I can talk about this topic. I've been dealing with how we authorize our police officers to use force against our civilians for a very long time. And so I'm happy to talk about a lot of different aspects of it tonight.
All right, that's great. And just to put the whole thing into perspective, this is merely one statistic, but I do a research on policing in America just about every day for over 3 years. For something got stuck in my craw about 3 years ago, and I just started looking into it, reading books, articles, watching their own body cam videos, some cell phone footage, that kind of thing. And I want to state from the beginning that this isn't an attempt to be anti-cop in its entirety. There's no doubt that we need some sort of people, like for example, we'll talk about this in a little bit. Like for example, human trafficking. The typical average citizen doesn't know how to even address that, even a little bit. Like,
right,
and it's a problem. So you need sort of experts on the inside to do things like this for sure. But of course, we know that there are a lot of concerns about policing, as far as mostly it has to do with traffic stops and stuff. How the police enact with the average Joe on the street or in a car. It tends to be where things go badly, either way or both ways sometimes. For example, there is about 210 sovereign nations in the world. American policing literally ranked number 6 as far as killings per year, and that's a disturbing statistic. On that very heavy note, why don't you go ahead and do your thing?
Well, so obviously, we ask police officers to go out and protect us. We ask them to investigate crimes. We ask them to make very fast decisions.
Right.
And the law respects that. And there's been changes to the law that I think better encapsulate the reality of today's America. I believe that the reason that the United States has such a problem with this topic is because of the, in my opinion, the possession of weapons. I do think that your average police officer in Iceland does not have as high a chance of facing a gun. And that's just a reality. And I think you'll see, Dave, as we go through the conversation, or if we have any questions tonight, you'll see that I believe in holding bad police officers accountable. So by me starting out by saying, well, there are less chances of a bad scenario in Iceland, it may sound that that I'm really on one side or the other, and I really don't think I am. I think I'm in the middle, like most Americans. Most Americans, I think it's 60% or even higher, understand that we do have a concern about racial disparities and how our justice system treats individuals who are Black or brown. And so I think most Americans acknowledge that. I think most Americans believe in their police officers, but we've seen so much evidence at this point in our history to say that Black and brown populations are policed differently at times. And so we have to watch that, talk about it, and acknowledge it, but also understand that our police officers who we ask to protect us face different challenges than people in other countries. And I don't mind also putting into this discussion That's why I believe in making sure that the wrong people don't have guns. That's part of my overall view of justice, my overall view of how we make our entire community safer. So I think all of these issues fit together.
That's very interesting, and there's definitely some statistical data to back that up. That, like, when police encounter somebody with a gun, that obviously heightens the risk of somebody getting hurt. Of course, they're not going to just stand there and let the guy point a gun at them, or somebody else for that matter. Okay, so going straight to like the Safety Act, and what kind of things has the General Assembly changed as far as police accountability, use of force, type of force, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think that where we went wrong in the United States, and I've said this relatively publicly and happy to say it here. I think that where we went wrong in the United States in this area was when we began to untangle self-defense and defense of others, which all of us, I think, have a legal right to. I think
definitely a moral right.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, insofar as we'll talk about moral rights or natural rights, let's just call it moral. Let's call it moral rights,
right.
Not natural rights. But we all have a moral right to protect ourselves. We have a long-standing right to protect other people, and that's exactly how we should look at policing.
Okay.
One of the things that went wrong in this conversation was in 1984, a case called Tennessee versus Garner came down, and that Supreme Court opinion said, well, police are also allowed to shoot fleeing deadly felons.
Ooh.
Yes. And that's actually what Illinois law said until the Safety Act. And so the very controversial Safety Act, actually, people talk about the cash bail, which I'm happy to talk about. But the other parts of the Safety Act, for example, mandated body cameras. We know that if we put body cameras on officers, we're going to all be safer. Frankly, officers are safer from false complaints. I think civilians are safer from potentially police overreach. 100%. That's one of the things the Safety Act did when it comes to overall safety and police civilian interactions. But to this conversation tonight, the Safety Act also joined the Illinois State Police use of force guidelines, which have been around for decades. The Illinois State Police are some of our best trained police officers, our most uniform training standards, I think, definitely apply to the Illinois State Police. And the Illinois State Police has always had the following rule, which now is the law in Illinois. Police may use force to protect themselves and to protect others if there is an immediate threat. That's it. It's basically the rest of self-defense law. And what the Safety Act appropriately removed was the right to use deadly force against a fleeing deadly felon, even if that felon or the person they believed is a felon isn't immediately threatening anyone. And I've trained police on this. I've talked to police about this. And if you look at it, it doesn't actually, that difference only kind of matters in a few of the sort of well-known national cases, but it's an important change because we are just asking the police officers do what all of us have a right to do, which is protect ourselves. Now, police obviously have additional training, they have additional tools. That's all fine, but it does bring Illinois into line with this idea that officers should absolutely protect themselves, they should protect others, but not go any further and shoot the fleeing deadly felon.
Yeah, well, that's great. And this is,
I say deadly. Excuse me. I think I misspoken. It's not a fleeing deadly felon. Excuse me. It's a fleeing forcible felon. I apologize. I made a mistake. It's the fleeing forcible. I need a little more coffee. It's the fleeing forcible felon, and a forcible felony can be a property crime. It can be a relatively a low felony. A forcible felony is a lot of things, and if the fleeing forcible felon is away from the officer and not threatening the officer and not threatening a schoolyard of kids,
right,
then why is the officer allowed to use deadly force? Well, in Illinois now they're not.
That's really interesting. Okay, that was a Supreme Court case you said in the 80s, that this Tennessee versus whatever?
Tennessee versus Garner came down in 1984 and said that it was not a violation of, I think, Mr. Garner's civil rights, that he had been shot. He, I think, had broken into a home and was fleeing from the police, and the police used deadly force. They shot him to arrest him. And that has been That has been the law. That is still the law of the land, that's not a violation of rights. But Illinois can go further, right? Nebraska can go further and protect people differently. They're just saying that the Supreme Court will not recognize a violation of federal constitutional rights if an officer does that. But in Illinois, it would be a violation of the law to shoot a fleeing forcible felon who was not an immediate threat to anyone else.
Right.
Some people might say, "Well, don't be a forcible felon, and don't be a fleeing forcible felon." But at the end of the day, a forcible felony is very broadly defined, and it's not a situation where we want police to be frankly, judge, jury, and executioner out there. And so you are only allowed to use deadly force when you are threatened or somebody else is threatened. And that's the way, I think that's the way it should be. So the Safety Act has that extra protection really for all of us.
Now, is there any sort of like explanation of what counts as like immediate threat? Because like I'm thinking of this happened a few years ago, and it wasn't in Illinois, where this 15-year-old girl called the cops because she was surrounded by a bunch of other girls who were bullying her, and the cops showed up, and the girl who called the cops had a knife in her hand, and they shot her like right then.
Well, there's the Ohio case. I don't know if it's the Ohio case. It might be the Ohio case where the one I'm thinking of is, though, the woman does run directly at somebody else, and the officer shoots her with the knife upheld. It might be a different case.
Okay.
So having said everything I've said about this, this fleeing forcible felon, at the end of the day, most of the cases are about whether police are reasonable in protecting themselves. There's a very tough case in, I think it is North Carolina. There's a very tough case where the officers are executing a search warrant and they kind of surround the car, and then eventually the car starts fleeing away from them and they shoot into the car.
Yes.
It is a perfect Tennessee versus Garner problem. The officers are not at any risk themselves. The person in the car doesn't have a weapon, or they don't have any reason to believe they have a weapon. There's not a report of a weapon, but they drive away from the officers, and then deadly force is used. The U.S. Supreme Court says that's not a violation of federal rights. Right. That would be a violation of law now in Illinois, and Illinois is allowed to, small d now, democratically depart from the U.S. Supreme Court standard in this way when it comes to what is a violation of constitutional rights. The Illinois and other states can say, well, that is a criminal act. And that's exactly what Illinois has done. And I understand that can be a little bit confusing. Well, isn't the Supreme Court the ultimate law of the land? But in the Tennessee versus Garner case, they were analyzing whether or not the Tennessee officer had violated Mr. Garner's federal constitutional rights. There was not a Tennessee law that criminalized what the officer had done. So when we get into this immediate threat, I agree. That's really the issue. So there's the Adam Toledo case in Chicago, where they're telling him to throw the gun. They're telling him to throw the gun. And you see the gun turn almost as the officer is firing. We're only going to bring criminal charges where it's clear beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody has broken the law. So that case is a very close call. And so even within the law that we still have prosecutors like myself deciding whether it's clear beyond a reasonable doubt that an officer has gone too far. Obviously, the Nichols case, the George Floyd case, these are cases that are directly on camera. I think it's Adam Toledo. The Adam Toledo case is directly on camera. Unfortunately, I've had a case where, unfortunately for a lot of reasons, but it was not on camera, and so we had to bring in trajectory experts and things like that to understand what was happening off camera. But many of the big cases in our country have been on camera, and some of the trainings I've done with the police, I sort of go through those, right? Like George Floyd, that's illegal before and after the Safety Act, right? Jacob Powell in is it Blake Powell or Jacob? Is it Jacob Powell? What's the name in What's the name of the guy in Wisconsin? Oh no, I got it. I maybe
I don't.
I think it is Tate.
I got shot in the back 7 times.
Yeah. So that that case is all on camera, and that case I think is an excessive use of force.
I think the cop got acquitted on that one, did he?
I think they didn't charge him.
Or didn't
and so these cases are pretty spelled out. Ahmaud Arbery doesn't involve the police, but it definitely involves a concern about obviously racism and really what was ended up being a lynching, and those guys are going to prison for decades, and they should. But much of that is on camera, and so you sort of have the situations where you have the ones on camera and you have the ones not on camera, and that is a big dividing line. And then that also goes back to the fact that it's okay. Like we've all many of us in working in this field have been around for a while, and we have to go back to a little bit whether or not people wanted body cameras 20 years ago. Did people want body cameras 15 years ago? When I ran for state's attorney, I said I thought every police officer in Lake County in Illinois should have a body camera. I don't know if my opponent ever answered my question on that, to be honest with you. But I do believe that every police officer in Lake County in Illinois should have a body camera, and I was very proud to support the Safety Act, partially because it mandated that. And so that's a really, really good thing. And it is expensive, but we are getting the funding to the police to do that. It is getting less and less expensive. Someday it will be, it keeps getting less and less expensive as technology improves and as the cameras get smaller and storage gets better. So anyway, I'm sorry, that was kind of a long answer, but I think that body camera, I think the camera point is really important.
Yeah, no, the camera point is very important. And it's, it's refreshing to see that this is happening. Real quick on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is just a bizarre little legal entity to me. I mean, 9 people get to decide the fate of hundreds of millions of other people. Just kind of bothers me. And they're not elected. And like, for example, in 1900, Black Elk versus USA. Are you familiar with this case?
Not yet. I might be if you tell me a little bit about it.
Basically, it came from English common law, the whole notion of it. So something happened. Black Elk on his reservation something happened with some sort of confrontation with a United States cop did something to him, and Black Elk defended himself or something, and so it went to trial. Basically, the Supreme Court said, this is 1900. I think there's been an act passed since then to negate it, but that basically, if a cop is approaching you unlawfully, you have the right to defend yourself, even to the point of death. Does that sound familiar?
Well, I don't know. No, I don't know that. I don't know that case, but I mean, generally speaking, we are talking about people being able to use, deadly force only when they are themselves are threatened with deadly force. And so,
what if it's a cop that's threatening you?
Well, not if he's not using deadly force, then you cannot use deadly force yourself.
Not deadly force, but just what if the cop is unlawfully detaining you or
so
physically grabbing you when you know damn well you didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, and this is, I think, one of the questions that you asked me and that I thought that I knew we'd be talking about. So in Illinois, it is not in Illinois, you cannot resist even an illegal arrest. People really struggle with that, and the reason for that. But I agree with the law, but I think it has to be used correctly by prosecutors, and it's more about prosecutors using it correctly who are elected, which is that we can't litigate the cases in the streets. And certainly with body cameras and more protections and the Safety Act improving the use of force rules, like it goes on to give a lot of restrictions on chokeholds. Chokeholds have been banned in Illinois for a few years, but it gives a better definition of a chokehold. There are more restrictions on using tasers and non-deadly options. So again, the Safety Act is very good. With all of these protections and with body cameras, we are asking our civilians to essentially agree that they can be arrested and then figure it all out in court. Because if we allow, in my opinion, and people can disagree with me, that's okay. If we allow civilians to take the position, well, this arrest is illegal, then essentially every arrest is going to become a fistfight. Every arrest is potentially going to move into this deadly or non-deadly space. And so, the law is that you are not permitted to resist an illegal arrest. So if you do resist an illegal arrest, it is a misdemeanor. but obviously, obviously prosecutors can decide, based on body cameras, because I said at the beginning, I believe in body cameras, right? Like these things all fit together, right? Like if right. But I mean, no, but I mean, seriously, like I got to say, like the legal system, they have to own it. I mean, they have to agree that they didn't believe in body cameras as fast as the technology was available. So asking a prosecutor who believes in body cameras, should you be so hard on, or how do you feel about this resisting arrest rule? Well, that's a little bit of a different question for a prosecutor who didn't believe in body cameras. But if you believe in body cameras and advocate for that, then you get to say, well, if all the body cameras are working, then, this is good. And I do believe that if police officers would ever intentionally turn off body cameras and you could show that, then you have an obstructing justice charge potentially against the officer. So anyway, so my point is that we have to have this rule that you cannot resist even an illegal arrest. It is kind of interesting that you might have noticed I've used the word arrest a few times because that's what the law is. The law is not. It does change whether the police officers are doing something else, and so it is a little bit different whether it's an arrest versus a search of a house. There's a little more pushback on saying, well, you can. If people didn't have search warrants or things like that. So it is really the phrase arrest that I've been using very intentionally to answer your question.
Okay. I mean, that's a tough one. I get what you're saying.
But having said that, it could be an illegal arrest, which is sort of an arrest that maybe doesn't have probable cause or whatever it is, or the person shouldn't be arrested. On the other hand, you are allowed to defend yourself. To be clear, you are allowed to defend yourself against an arrest that is using excessive force. Okay.
But wouldn't that be the same thing that you would still have to figure out if it counted as excessive force at trial?
No, exactly. But if obviously if the officer is going way beyond, if the officer is going beyond on the force, and frankly, I have charged a police officer with excessive force, even separate from a homicide. They're the same police officer I charged, with the homicide, and I think I'm the only prosecutor. I've been told I'm the only prosecutor outside of Chicago that's ever done that.
Wow.
The police officer that I charged with the homicide a year earlier, maybe 14 months earlier, had also beat a man. And so I charged him with that crime too. So let me be clear. I'm not saying the police get to do whatever they want. I'm commenting that if the only force they're using is the force for the arrest, then you got to sort that out in court. If they're using excessive force against you, then you can protect yourself.
Yeah. Okay. That's a very important clarification.
Right. Because, no, I think it is.
Because I know people are getting frustrated. Like there's a ton of examples, but like one that's happened recently. And again, I don't remember where, but it was these three cops already had a guy on the ground and cops, and they're just beating the hell out of him.
Right. And that's a crime.
They're going to jail. Yeah. No, they're already charged.
That's a crime.
Yeah. But the standers-by who were videoing it, you feel like the frustration they have, like the best I can do is sit here and video it. I can't stop them from doing this. That's ridiculous, right?
Yeah, but I mean, police are interacting with civilians. I mean, we don't hear about the planes that don't crash, right? I mean, we are right. That's why I tell myself every time I get on a plane, by the way, right? Like 1,000 planes have landed since I was boarding.
Right.
But I mean, we don't hear about the planes that don't crash. So I mean, police officers are constantly having a strong, healthy, safe interactions all the time. Every police chief that I've worked with, in Lake County closely on this issue, has expressed and understood that they needed to say, we want our officers to treat everybody well. We want our officers to be safe. I think that police training has massively gone up in the last 20 years that I've been involved. I think the number of resisting arrest charges have probably plummeted even before I became state's attorney. And we have to watch those because it is also, people naturally resisting a handcuffing. Like, you put my hands behind my back and I struggle a little bit. That's not a resisting arrest. It's a natural reaction. Okay. So you have to be careful. You have to be careful with the charging of it, because it is essentially, if you can't resist an illegal arrest, then you're sort of, it's tough to enforce that reasonable doubt standard when there's almost nothing that a person can do when there is an arrest. So a natural reaction to being handcuffed is one thing, but it's really the headlong flight or pushing a police officer. I mean, obviously that's a separate crime and it should be. So people who resist arrest, I mean, we're talking about people who generally are running away from an arrest or are refusing to respond to multiple commands. So, I saw one where there was a trespassing case and, the person, refused to leave, but then put their hands behind their back. But I don't think they wanted to go, but there was no resisting charge, right? They just didn't want to leave the area they were in. So I think for the most part, in Lake County, the interactions I see between the police and the civilians are healthy.
Okay. Well, on this same topic of resisting police commands and that kind of thing, or not obeying them, I've come across, again, with all my research, a lot of like First, Second, and Fourth Amendment auditors. I'm sure you've heard of them. And some of them are just out there to be rude. Some of them are wholly legit, and they capture a lot of interesting stuff. What I did notice is that a lot of cops don't like that. They don't like that there's somebody standing over there videoing their crime scene, if you will, or traffic stop. Some of the cops will come up and say, you can't do that. The First Amendment auditor says, yes, I can. It's a First Amendment protected activity. I'm well beyond any sort of area that might suggest I'm intervening. You went well out of your way to come over and approach me. And sometimes the cops will confiscate the gun or the camera and arrest the guy. And then, of course, the charges get dropped and they get sued and the auditor makes $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, blah, blah, blah. What's the case like that in Illinois? Because is it a First Amendment protected activity to video the police?
Yeah, so we actually we actually dealt with this in Illinois for a while, about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer now. No, about 10 years ago. Under our eavesdropping statute, which I know is a little bit of a weird way to jump into this, but for a while, our eavesdropping statute wouldn't permit the recording of a crime scene or a police officer even in public. And I think the federal and the state courts all struck that down and said that there is a right to this activity. You certainly can't interfere. You can't encourage somebody who's in the middle of a DUI. You can't encourage somebody who's in the middle of a DUI being arrested for a DUI to run or to resist the officer. But I mean, for the most part, I haven't seen any charges, at least as long as I've been state attorney, where the police charged somebody who was doing a recording in public. So I've certainly heard of that. I've seen there's a very bad video, I think in Texas or somewhere out west, where an African-American young person, I feel like they're in their 20s, is video recording a courthouse actually. And about 10 deputies surround him and start giving him a really hard time. And it's really disturbing. It doesn't feel like America. And so, I think that I haven't seen that in Lake County, but in Illinois, there is that right to record these incidents. And it's not that much different than the body cameras. It's not that much different than the body cameras. If anything, it's a little bit further back. You don't have an officer who's sort of in a scrum with their body camera, frankly, through no fault of their own, not showing something. You have people who are further back. So I think that is an important part of just the world we live in now. I mean, people are recorded in bars. I saw a guy very upset that the Eagles lost yesterday, and he was in a home and he destroyed a TV. So I mean, people are getting recorded all the time now.
Okay, well, all right, what about like the first freedom of speech? Because a lot of the auditors, like I said, a lot of these guys are just there to be rude, and they're just there to push the cops' buttons. But I guess just with the right, if you will, the constitutional right to address your government and say what you want to your government. I mean, you see videos of guys going up to cops and just saying all sorts of nasty stuff, and the cops just sit there and take it. Some don't, but I mean, is that another constitutionally protected activity? Is that you could just go to a cop and go, "You suck, I hate you"?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, certainly, it would. It's always going to depend on the context. It's certainly a right to. It's always a right to speak. I learned in law school that you can wear a shirt that says "F the draft." You can even do that in the court. You can even do that in a courthouse. And I think they they were having a case about the draft. But yeah, I mean, I think that it was certainly the we recognize everybody's right to to protest and to yell and scream. I think the difficult part becomes, what do we want? What do we want the relationship to be between the community and the police? For getting some of these tough, for getting even some of these tough cases. It is true. It is true that we do ask police to protect us, to go into tough situations, and I do hear a lot of people say that they have a hard time. They have a hard time, understanding that. But if you look at the number of domestic violence calls that police respond to, and you look at the dozens of calls that I'll see in a week that come through one of our systems, you'll understand that we obviously, it goes without saying, but I still need to say it, that we do need police. We do need police responding and responding in a certain type of way to difficult situations. By far their most common response is to a domestic violence incident.
Okay.
So do they need to come in? I mean, do they need to, do we need to send 10 police officers to collect a video from a jewel for a retail theft? No. And I don't know that we do that anymore. But they certainly don't have time to respond in different ways or with different weapons when they go to the jewel, or now they have to respond, 45 seconds later to a domestic violence. So I think we have to keep domestic violence incidences very much at the front of our mind when we question. I don't, but if other people question, for example, why our police are, responding in certain ways or with certain weapons. Well, a lot of times we're asking them to go into homes and all they know is that there's a drunk person inside who's maybe hit his wife a few times. Okay. If you think of that as the most common call, and if you think of the horror that domestic violence has done in our community, and frankly, primarily has caused to women, though we know that men can be abused too. But if we think about the horror of that, and we think about the number of calls, there's a lot more domestic violence calls that I see that come through our what's called our screener program every night than retail theft cases where we wish that the police officer hadn't gotten out his mace or gotten out his taser or gotten out his firearm. That never happens. But I do see dozens of domestic violence calls. So I think when you put it in that context, I think you have to think a little bit differently about what we ask our police officers to do.
Okay, fair enough. But there is a little twist here on the domestic abuse thing, which is that policing is the number one profession with the highest amount of domestic abuse.
I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't.
I'll email you the links.
Okay.
In fact, independent studies have shown about 40%. Like, it's a huge amount, and a lot of people think it's because policing is so stressful that they just go home and take it out on whomever. Some think that when you go to pick a profession, you choose one because you're attracted to what it is, and violence and authoritarianism are inherent in policing. Do you have anything to say?
No, I don't think I agree. No, I don't agree with you on that, in the sense that, I mean, the police that I have worked with, both as a defense attorney, and I was a defense attorney. In my career before I became the state's attorney. I mean, the police that I work with, I haven't seen that. We don't have. We do have. I think we do have a couple cases of officers charged with domestic violence, but we don't have a large number of them. On the other hand, we know that domestic violence is vastly underreported. On the other hand, we do have hundreds of police officers in Lake County, and I don't think we've had that many issues. But for the most part, police are not using violence on a daily basis. They are responding to calls and responding to calls and investigating crimes and doing the right things. And they themselves are not putting hands on very often. They now have use of force reports that they have to follow. And so, look, I'm just telling you what I see come across our desk. If I was, I'm also the only prosecutor outside of Chicago that's brought a homicide case against a police officer. So, I mean, I think there's a balance. What's that?
I mean, it must have been within the last 2 years. Oh, that homicide case?
Oh, yeah. It was in Waukegan. It was against a police officer who shot into a moving car in Waukegan. in October of 2020. I was elected in November of 2020, and I brought the charges.
Oh, I think I remember that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that, look, I think we have to get the balance correct, but I think we have to, I just think we have to remember. I think we have to remember what we are asking our police officers, what we're asking our police officers to do. I think there certainly need to be changes with respect to the amount of training that people have to respond to mental health crises. I'm a big believer in that. The sheriff has done a great job with expanding training in that. I think we have to keep working on. I think we have to keep working on de-escalation, and we have to remember what the stakes are. If somebody's fleeing from a traffic stop on a drug case, and there's no belief that there's any weapons involved, or any prior violent incidents, or there's not a warrant for somebody's arrest out of Florida for kidnapping or something like that, like, you have to kind of think about what the stakes are if a guy excuse me, you have to think a little bit about what the stakes are if a guy is trying to get away from a cocaine arrest. Like, I think people have to be reasonable and think about sort of what is at stake. Obviously, we have to deal with that person, but it doesn't need to be a high speed pursuit at noon through residential areas. So you have to be thinking, and for the most part, they do have different pursuit policies, which they follow. I've also, but we also, in terms of police accountability, we've done a lot in our office. We have a list called the Brady list, which are police officers who have made a mistake in the past, and we have to give additional information to defense counsel. Well, we doubled the Brady list. We doubled the Brady list since I've become state's attorney. We've actually promulgated the first Brady policy. Before I became state's attorney, there wasn't a written Brady policy in the office. We have an 8-page Brady policy now that every state's attorney has to read and sign. So we are moving in which by the way mirrors the federal Brady policy. It's not rocket science. There was always a federal Brady policy, but we didn't have one in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office until I became state's attorney. So there has to be a sort of very there has to be a middle approach to a lot of this.
Okay. So you said earlier that you think that the massive amount of guns in the streets or amongst the general population has a lot to do with, or something that a significant amount to do with some of the interactions cops have daily, why the police violence can explain some of the police violence. What about
that can explain some of the concern that police have as they walk up to a car at 2 a.m. Sure.
Right. What about the war on drugs? We have in this country more people incarcerated per capita than any other country in the world. That's an extremely unfortunate statistic for the land of the free. Do you think the war on drugs has a lot to do with that? And how much is Lake County dealing with drugs, possession and stuff?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the first things we did when I became state's attorney, which they had not done, in 2020, I think it was 2020, marijuana was legalized.
Yeah, that's huge.
But I didn't become state's attorney until December of 2020.
Okay.
And so, what should have happened was they needed to quash all of the warrants for the arrest of anybody possessing marijuana.
Right.
Well, that didn't get done until I became state's attorney a year after the effective date, because we can't have police officers arresting people for something that's not illegal, because now the guy runs away, and then the guy, what happens if it's in Pennsylvania? Right now it's in Pennsylvania, and a guy gets shot running away from a marijuana charge in Illinois. Guess who's going to get sued? Lake County, because they didn't quash their warrant, because marijuana is not illegal in Illinois. And I don't know if it's illegal in Pennsylvania, but it doesn't matter, because we shouldn't be arresting him if it's not illegal in any state. So, and so that was something I was very proud to get done. And we have obviously pulled back from incarcerating people who are charged with low level drug offenses. We're trying to get them treatment and help, and not put the court and incarceration resources into it. We just got some statistics that show who is in prison from Lake County. It's actually public record, at least for the Illinois Department of Corrections, who is in Lake County from prison, or who is in prison from Lake County, which is very interesting. And so we are going through that data to see if we have, if there's anybody that we need to take a look at. So I think you have to proceed very intentionally. I've asked my prosecutors to focus on violent crimes. I've asked my prosecutors to focus on crimes with victims, and that can be a nonviolent crime like an identity theft. We had this guy named Chris Dugo who was stealing tens of thousands of people, and we put resources into that. So it's not just violent versus nonviolent. You have, real scams that are going on, but really, but a drug case is a we can agree is neither violent and it's victimless. Right. And so exactly. And so I've asked my prosecutors to move quickly on those cases, to figure out what we should do, and to increase our diversion and deflection programs. I'm thrilled to tell you that we've doubled our diversion program and we've ended our racial disparities. Before I became state's attorney, we had massive racial disparities in our diversion program, which is where you just ask somebody to go do treatment or do something, and then we drop the case against you. That's for nonviolent cases like drug cases, and we have massively expanded our diversion programs since I become state's attorney.
What does that mean? Like, what exactly? How have you expanded?
Sure. We've let more people into the program.
Okay.
So it was, and it's still, we're still working to expand it even bigger. To say double it means we had very few people in it, and we've doubled the number of defendants that we've put into the program. Okay. And that's one of the ways that we can deal with the drug. That's one of the ways that we can deal with drugs, which is a public health issue. Yeah. If people are addicted, it is not something where we need to be, putting court and incarceration resources into.
Are you getting a lot of? Well, you said you doubled it, but I mean, is like I know at the Mundelein Police Department a few years ago, I read that they are doing the similar sort of thing. Yeah. Where like if you're a drug addict, you can come, give us your drugs. You're not going to get arrested. We're going to get you the help you need, that kind of thing. It was a wonderful moment when I read that. Is it independent towns that can do this?
Yeah, it's called the Way Out. It's called a Way Out program. It's been shown to be saving lives. It is. It's called a self-referral system, which is where you have to go into the Mundelein Police Department and say, "I want to enter into treatment. Here are my drugs." I would push that into even a non-self-referral system. I think if you get pulled over for a driving on revoked, or if you get pulled over for a retail, or if you have a retail theft, and you want to go into treatment, I think we need to expand it into our other nonviolent cases and not just be people who are willing to walk into a police department, because people in their struggle with substance abuse are going to want to come into police departments at different times, maybe not at all. And there are big racial disparities with respect to who is comfortable to walking into a police department. That's why I think if you have a nonviolent arrest for a nonviolent case, I think the diversion programs, and that one's called a deflection program, I think that needs to be expanded. And we just had a summit on this on December 8th. We had a summit with Dave, we must have had 150 people in that room, of police leaders, social workers, counselors, prosecutors who were learning about these programs, to really look at what we have in Lake County. And here's the thing, man. Lake County believes in diversion and deflection. Lake County believes in not incarcerating people. Okay. We're just not branding it. Okay? Yeah, we're not branding it and saying we believe in this restorative justice approach. We believe in diversion and deflection. Frankly, most people do believe in diversion and deflection. Police chiefs who I thought were going to be hard law and order guys, who wouldn't want a diversion program for a nonviolent case, believe in it. But I kind of need them to say that. I kind of need them to say that on their Facebook page, right? Because it can't just be like, oh, well, I don't know if the court system is hard enough on people. No, say it out loud and brand it, and then let's all move together, since we sort of have a consensus on this, instead of kind of saying we don't have a consensus on this. We absolutely have a consensus on this. Antioch is going to have an event. I think it's on February 25th. Antioch is going to have an event that talks about how we can get people into treatment instead of into jail. So, I mean, there really is a groundswell for people to move into a less sort of coercive part of the justice system, which really is some of the questions you're asking me tonight. People want to do that, but like we got to sort of like say that and not just, read people's comments on the McHenry scanner about why everybody isn't being sent to prison for 50 years.
Right. And you said restorative justice, which is an important term here, because the contrast is retributive justice, which is the restorative means like you did something, you're doing something not great, and we're going to help you get back to being your whole self again, restore you, if you will. Okay. Retributive justice is you did something wrong, so we're going to wail on you just because you did something wrong. That we're going to punish you just because you did something wrong.
Absolutely. And
it's retribution.
Right. And that's not, and so one of the things that frankly, we're going to move into a little bit different area here, right? But our gun violence prevention initiative has a component of it which acknowledges that convictions on records, people being incarcerated, being away from their family, convictions on records stop educational and employment opportunities. Breaking up a family, stop. I got 2 8-year-old kids, 10 feet away from me, right? Breaking up families has an impact. Here's the thing. We have to incarcerate people to protect society. Violent cases, sex cases, domestic violence, whatever it is.
100%.
All I think restorative justice proponents are doing, I would call myself that, is asking that we get the balance sheet correct. And that if we're going to put somebody in prison for a nonviolent offense or an offense that doesn't have a victim, like a driving on revoked, we got to really think about what that's doing to the 10-year-old kid who we can't see that day. We got to think about what that does to the guy's employment opportunities when he was this close to getting his CDL. We got to think about that. We got to acknowledge that. And we have to say this. Our justice system should not be causing more instability than the crime itself.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. We cannot allow our justice system to be a driver of instability, because instability is a driver of violence.
100%.
And that's what our gun violence prevention initiative does. And it recognizes this. We haven't been fair or equitable about this historically. If we know that more Black and brown people have convictions on their records because money is the thing that stops people from getting convictions on their records, right? If frankly a kid, a white rich kid, knocks over a gravestone and they don't get a conviction on their record, but a kid of color doesn't have a parent who gets them out of that, and they do get a conviction on their record, that's not the end of the world that day, but it is when the prosecutor looks at it 2 years later. Right. Now money has played a role, or potentially implicit or unconscious bias has played a role in the initial decision, which has an impact 2 years later. And so that's how these things perpetuate themselves. And that's what I think the justice system must, in a clear-eyed way, acknowledge and rid itself of.
Very cool. And the perfect point of segue. Let's talk about cash bail. Talking about one of the justice system's use of money, which disproportionately affects the poor more than the rich, which, I mean, the cash bail has always been a problem because of that. That's basically all it did, is it kept poor people in jail and let rich people go home until their trial. So yeah. But go ahead. Safety Act, cash bail.
Sure. So the Safety Act ended. The Safety Act ends the use of cash bail. The Safety Act is currently on pause while the Supreme Court analyzes it. I'm confident that they will uphold it. The attack on it is really it's a pretty and it's okay. Like it's okay. This isn't a criticism. I disagree with the attack, but what I'm going to say is it's a pretty technical attack, and that's not the end of the world. But it is a pretty technical attack. It's an attack about whether or not it violates the separation of powers with the roles that judges have. It's not as much about whether it violates defendants' rights to cash bail, because other systems say, well, you have to have sufficient bail, but they actually don't mean cash. Our federal system hasn't used cash bail for almost 40 years now. Oh. Our juvenile system has never used cash bail in Illinois, and yet none of that violates the Illinois or United States Constitution.
There you go.
So it's a relatively technical attack on the Safety Act. So having said that, cash bail allows rich people to get out regardless of the crime, and it holds poor people in regardless of the crime. I think we should make an intention, and I think from your, Dave, I've gotten to know your views a little bit. I think you're going to love this point. It also let judges wash their hands of things. If I tell you that a judge sets a $10,000 cash bail, and that's all I told you, that the guy has to post $10,000, you wouldn't know whether the judge made a good decision or a bad decision, would you? You would have no idea. You'd say, Eric, I need a lot more context. Exactly. And so what cash bail does is it allows judges to say, well, I told the guy he needed $10,000. I didn't know whether he had 10,000 or not, because you don't turn in your 1040s, and you don't turn in your 1040s at a bail hearing, and you don't have judges who can see into people's mattresses or safes.
Right.
So why in the world would we use cash? A judge should make an intentional, transparent decision. Should you be in or should you be out while the case is pending?
Are you a flight risk or not?
Are you a flight risk? Are you a danger to the community? That's it. And we've I'm going to say it. We've laundered that accountability by using cash, by using cash. And so our federal judges don't live in that world. Our juvenile judges don't live in that world. And soon our Illinois judges will not live in that world. And frankly, my prosecutors have to decide whether they're going to seek to hold somebody. But that's going to be accountability. That's going to be, I had somebody ask me, Eric, what are you going to do about all these guns on the street, all these illegal guns? What are you going to do when you arrest a gun offender? Before the Safety Act, what am I going to say? Well, I'm going to ask for a cash bail that holds people. Well, that's not the point of cash bail. The point of cash bail is something like, well, if you put down enough money, then you're sure to come back to court, which just isn't true. Right. But as a leader who needs to be accountable to the people, when somebody says to me, what are you going to do about all these people with guns? I'm going to say, well, I hope our bails are high enough. Under the Safety Act, I'm going to say, I'm going to file petitions to hold people who have guns. And then other people get to say, well, should everybody be held who has an illegal gun? I trend on the yes side. By the way, that doesn't mean they're going to prison. They're just being held in our local jail until the case is resolved, because there can be a lot of, some of the cases are very important as we think about police accountability in terms of there's 3 of us in a car and only 1 gun. But here's the point. I have to answer your questions. I have to answer the voters' questions. I have to answer the civilians' questions about what I did in a gun case. Think about it. You asking me, well, Eric, what'd you do about that gun case? I say, well, I don't know. My prosecutors asked for $15,000. And you'd say, Eric, what does that mean? Did the guy have $15,000? Did his buddy have $15,000? Did his cousin have $15,000? You'd say, what a terrible way to run a government.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Why would we run a government that way, that we allow the results of the moment to be determined based on 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th parties and unknown factors by the government actors? Right. Judges and prosecutors should say, do you want somebody in or do you want somebody out? That's it.
It seems like a no-brainer to me. So, okay.
but right. And exactly. I mean, I'm kind of making that transparency point because I know you are very interested in that topic, but obviously we don't want rich, violent people. We had a guy who abused children. Okay. He abused children and he posted $250,000. I don't mean $25,000. I mean $250,000, and he fled. Okay. We don't want people doing that. And we also don't want to hold people who happen to not have money on a retail theft or on a driving on revoked because they don't have money. If the judge meant to hold them because they're a danger, then she or he should say it. And if they don't want the person held, then she or he should say it. It shouldn't just be like, well, I don't know if the guy had $500 in his pocket. That's a ridiculous way to run a system.
Yeah, that's pretty silly. All right, we only have a few minutes left here. What else in the Safety Act is worth discussing, do you think?
Well, I think the Safety Act, it did a lot. The body cameras, as we talked about, it created more accountability for police officers. One of the topics that we're talking about tonight, where they're not able to move between departments, if they've had a prior finding against them. There's a decertification process. It makes sure that law enforcement records are never destroyed if there's a misconduct. It got rid of the affidavit requirement that people have to sign an affidavit under penalty of perjury to make a complaint against the police, which I think is a good thing, because I think you want to, doesn't mean a police officer is going to be found that they did make a mistake, but you have to decrease the barriers to people making these to people truthfully talking about what happened. Again, that's why I'm for body cameras. The Safety Act increased funding for police officers, actually, which people don't know. It increased training for de-escalation techniques. It increased some funding for officers to take care of themselves too. Just we all need help when we're dealing with trauma. So there's additional support for officers with that. I mean, prosecutors need that. Defense attorneys need that. They see some terrible things. So there's a lot of great things in the Safety Act. I'm probably forgetting a few because I've been so focused on the cash part of it, which has been the debate over the last few months. The Supreme Court will probably decide in March or April whether the Safety Act is going to be what we go with. So I think it's a good act. I think it makes people say what they're doing instead of hiding behind the cash issue. And, there was a criticism of the Safety Act that a lot of people couldn't be held. And they did make a few changes to the Safety Act, which I supported. And I, told my legislators that they needed to expand a few things, and they did. And it's a good story. And it's, there were a lot of lies about the Safety Act that weren't true. And I had to fight very hard to tell people the truth. And I think the truth came out, and people, I think the truth got out there, and the legislators who advocated for the Safety Act were not politically hurt. And so that's obviously what I think should have happened. So I think the Safety Act is really strong. Couple real quick things. It's going to make us focus on violent cases, and people are not thinking about this. If the people who are charged with a violent crime are held in, then people don't know this, but the system focuses on custodies first. Okay, that's a good thing. That makes sense. That's a great thing for victims. That's a great thing. That's a great thing for a system that has made mistakes in the past. Lake County has made mistakes in the past, but we're going to focus on the cases. We're going to allow my prosecutors to focus on those cases first. We had a juvenile case where a guy was wrongfully arrested. My prosecutors figured it out quickly, as did the Waukegan Police Department. I want to be very clear about that. The Waukegan Police Department and the prosecutors figured it out quickly. They did make a wrongful arrest at the beginning, but they figured it out within 37 hours. Okay. And that 37 hours is a big deal. Like that shouldn't have happened, but it wasn't 37 weeks. It wasn't 37 days. It wasn't 37 years. Why? Well, the juvenile system doesn't have cash. So everybody knew that this juvenile was about to have a detention hearing. So everybody focused. It was an allegation of a shooting. Everybody was focused. They weren't also saying, well, what am I doing with my retail theft guys today? You can't hold it. I don't think you can hold a kid on a retail theft. Okay. And so people are focused, and they were focused on a violent crime. That's what the prosecutors are going to be, is they're going to be focused in the first few days on, are we going to win our detention hearing? And that's a great thing. And then after that, when they're in, if people are held in, then we're going to be focusing on those cases faster. And I think that's really good for victims. Every victims group supported the Safety Act. Dave, here's all I ask. This is my only ask of you, other than to keep asking tough questions.
Okay.
But here's my other ask.
Okay.
Here's the tough question I want you to ask. If you ever find an opponent of the Safety Act, ask them why every victims group in Illinois, the men and women who toil in the trenches of the trauma of survivors, the people who spent their lives, some of whom are survivors themselves, the people who spent their lives advocating for survivors believed in the Safety Act. So I did not hear one person from the other party. I did not hear one person from the other party answer that question ever. I never heard anybody say why they thought they knew better than victims groups. Every major victims group in Illinois supported the Safety Act, and it was because it was a way to make sure that rich domestic abusers didn't post money and then re-victimize somebody. So anyway, ask that question. If you ever run into an opponent of the Safety Act, and when the Safety Act gets reinstated, we're all going to do this all again. I just ask somebody, well, why do you disagree with the victims groups?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I will definitely keep that in mind when I find something, because I know it's kind of calmed down a bit in social media. When it first happened, it was all over the place. They were calling the cash bail the Great Purge, like that, like the movie. Like, oh, they're going to let all these violent criminals free. I'm like, what are you talking about? That has absolutely that's not even right. Right. Like, I don't know what you're saying.
So those same people are going to talk and lie again when the Safety Act is reinstated. So we have to watch for that.
Those are all the people that voted for Trump. Anyway, I could say that. So, okay, very cool. Do you think, real quick, do you think the police? You said money given to police concerning training. Do you think the training is the quality of training is going up considerably? Because one thing I noticed, like with a lot of the body cam videos that I see and the cell phone videos that I see, is a lot of times, that these cops are getting absolutely schooled by the people that they approach on what counts as the law. I mean, it's really good.
I think it's improving throughout the country. I know it's improving. I think we're seeing, I think we're seeing that in Lake County. The chiefs that I work with, I'll be at a chiefs meeting tomorrow. The chiefs that I work with, they want the training. They're hungry for the training. They ask for the training. And it's a little bit of a question of sort of what happens at 2 a.m. at night when the police chief isn't watching. But then eventually that chief is watching because of body cameras, right? But I get it. I mean, I think that you do have a new commitment, I think, from a lot of police leadership. You do have a new commitment from a lot of police leadership to to work on these things. That's at least what I'm seeing at the levels. And then the question is sort of what's getting down to the men and women who respond to our calls at 2 a.m.
All right. Well, sounds good. All right. Well, then it's exactly 8 o'clock.
All right, and I hear my 8-year-olds knocking on this door. So
all right, they want their bedtime. All right, cool. Eric Rinehart, Lake County State's Attorney. Thank you so much for coming on. Seriously,
thank you.
Great conversation, very insightful. I'm probably going to send you an email about some stuff, and I also want to ask you because I want to get somebody from DCFS on the show.
Oh, I think that is a great idea. I think understanding the DCFS system, how it intersects with the justice system, how it intersects with social equity is one of the conversations we are not having in Illinois.
Exactly, 100%. So I will send you an email with all that information and hopefully you can connect me. You have a great night, sir. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Illinois Green Party. Till next time, be good, be green.
Good night.
See ya.